of course, it has been a very, very frosty relationship that has, developed between the civil society and the government so far. Let's begin with you, George, first of all, because there were actually allegations about Kenya Human Rights Commission as well, that first of all, you had creative accounts. And this was coming from Fazul himself, that yes, you have two separate accounts. One for the donor is reading very differently, and yours is reading very differently.
Yes, we've gone through this since 2015, 2016, when they first published a list of 900 NGOs that they said were supporting, could have been supporting terrorism, that may have been involved in money laundering and diversion of donor funds. We became aware of that list only in the media, and there had been no prior engagement with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, which was one of the organizations mentioned in the 900 strong list. So after that, we engaged the NGO board to try and understand the basis of the accusations against our organization. But the NGO board refused to meet with us. They did not reply to our mail. Now that forced us to seek legal redress in court, and we have got a final judgment by Justice Onguto that declared the conduct of the NGO board to have been arbitrary. We thought that the judgment of the High Court would then change the behavior of the NGO board towards ourselves, until we got a similar attack by the NGO board, this time round singling the Kenya Human Rights Commission alone. And the accusations were similar to the ones that had been made a year before, that we were keeping illegal accounts, that we were paying our directors and concealing that fact by false accounting, and so on and so forth. Again, we finally had an engagement with the NGO board this time around, and the reason why we've had an engagement with the NGO board is because the Cabinet Secretary for Interior then intervened and said, if you accuse the Kenya Human Rights Commission, then you must meet them and tell them what is wrong with them. So an engagement then commenced with the NGO board that is supposed to lead to them telling us what is wrong with the Kenya Human Rights Commission. But again, like last time, we became aware of this only in the media. We were.
So you were not consulted on this?
No, we were not. We were not. They never reached out to us. We only became aware of it from the media, asking us to react to what the NGO board had placed in the media. We find that to be. I wouldn't think that good faith, an organization or a regulator acting in good faith, goes to the media and accuses an organization that it is supposed to be regulating and leaves it there, and that organization now starts scampering to find information that forms the basis of the accusation. So that has been the way unfortunately, that we've proceeded with NGO board, and an engagement is ongoing with them. We've not reached the end of that engagement. We would like to see, we are ourselves anxious to see how that engagement ends. We've maintained, and I would like to repeat, that we exercise the greatest integrity as a Kenya Human Rights Commission, the greatest internal integrity in the manner that we keep our books. And it is the same integrity that we demand of government. It is the same integrity that we demand of others, but it is that integrity that has come under attack. One of the attacks that we have been under, which is a completely false attack, and it has no basis whatsoever, is an allegation that our board of directors receive a financial benefit as a result of serving as board members of the Kenya Human Rights Commission. The truth is that our board of directors serve completely voluntarily. None of them has ever received a single cent in terms of compensation. So it is this of course is then defamation. And it is defamation of people who regard themselves as patriots, as people who are moved by the highest considerations and the most selfless considerations to serve their country. To be smeared in this manner, it is highly responsible.
Okay, but that's maybe they might have picked out on your organization, but the underlying factor is, do we have some, Mark and Mire and rot within NGOs as well, right? Because amongst all the 500 deregistered NGOs, we can't say that all of them are squeaky clean. There are some scrupulous, individuals who are, using the cover of not-for-profit organizations as well. Let's hear from Peter.
Yeah, I'll say that, Debarl, that our understanding of the NGO Bureau within civic space is actually to facilitate citizens to utilize that civic space for the good of this country. And regulation doesn't mean punitive measures. Regulation means, facilitating, being a facilitator, being the catalyst for all actors in that space to be able to participate and collaborate with government and other actors to see that we achieve Vision 2030. That's the bottom line. But also, I think this discussion has not benefited from the fact that every year, what you're calling NGOs report to the NGO Bureau. Every year, we submit our annual narrative reports, we submit our audited reports, we submit the list of directors who served that year in the audited reports. We use, reputable, audit firms to do our audits. We do, at some levels also account to Kenyans themselves directly, what we call downward accountability. We do account to development partners who give us financial support. So there are so many levels at which we account for what we do. And therefore, I think it's good to first of all, clarify that many of the NGOs who have appeared on those lists in the media actually submit annual reports to the NGO Bureau every year. And you get an acknowledgement receipt every year from them saying, we have received this, we are okay. So when you then find yourself in the media, it creates doubts as to the motive of that particular communication. So I think it's good to appreciate that. However, like any other sector, you always have deficits in particular areas. But those deficits should be brought to the table for discussion. For example, if we submit our audited reports and we did not declare the board of directors who served that particular year, that is not something to communicate to the media as a regulator. It's something to bring to the table for discussion and rectification. So I do think that the communication to the media that has happened from the NGO Bureau has been in bad faith, to say the least. Yeah, but I'll defer to Irongo maybe too. He's been on this matter for quite some time.
Actually, the thing that struck me a little bit when Kiama was speaking was the days that I walked into the NGO sector. Really go back to about 1991, and given that there are no women on this panel, and I'm going to get hammered in the course of the day on being on a panel, or actually a manel as we now call them. Let me just share a little bit. I joined the sector really at a point where women's rights and gender equality was really at a very bad moment. This is 91. And the two actions that really propelled me into this sector were really to do with women's rights issues. The Mothers in Action coalition that emerged, led by organizations like Feminet, FIDA, and others, that were very concerned about the death, I think it was about 15 girls and 69 girls raped at St. Kizito during that year.
Yes.
And many of us came to the sector really wanting to make a difference in terms of the protection and the safety and the rights of women and girls. I was also, kind of conscientized by the actions of mothers of political prisoners, led by Wangari Maathai, then the executive director of the Greenbelt movement. So NGOs have really been a source of hope and inspiration for me. Not a sector that is in contestation with the government, necessarily, but really a place where we could come and really just express, three values. And I think these are the values that really make the best of the sector the best. The first value is good governance and public accountability, that all those resources that we give up to the government are used to the best of the government's ability. The second one was really around constitutionalism and human rights, that no Kenyan should fear of discrimination, should fear that they will be targeted either based on their ethnicity or based on their gender or based on their race, or even, I may add, based on their sexuality, that all Kenyans have a right to express themselves and to live free of violence. And the last one was really shared development, you know, that there are no Kenyans better than other Kenyans. There are no Kenyans that need health, education, transport more than other Kenyans. And that we would create a society in which all Kenyans would have access, free access and equal access to the benefits of the Bill of Rights. These are really the values that drive our sector, you know. So to be constantly reminded that we are a threat to the state, that we are engaged in nefarious activities, if I can quote the principal secretary for the Interior, or that we are involved in money laundering or terrorism or donor diversion of funds, I think really are something that I don't recognize in the sector. And the evidence is there in the sector. If you look at the number of allegations versus the number of convictions or the number of cases where NGOs have actually been proven to be involved in any of those three things, they are minimal. The examples that you will be given are probably 1996 when the US Embassy was bombed, or more recently when there was discussions around countering violent extremism. That is not the sector that I know. That is not the sector that we have worked for. And I'm sure deep down in the hearts of government, they know that is not the sector. Because if it was the case, we couldn't have produced a Chief Justice. We couldn't have produced half of the National Assembly or half of the Senate. We couldn't have, for example, a Principal Secretary who once managed the Ministry of Interior, Monica Juma, having come from our sector. We just could not have generated that if we were all that we are being claimed
We
now to
couldn't
be.
have produced
Right.
Matiang'i.
Even our Cabinet Secretary for Education
as well.
comes from our sector.
All right.
Some of the most effective visionary leaders that we're seeing at the moment really have had a history and a root in the sector.
Right, but if you look at the baseline survey that was done in the mid-1990s, it revealed that 75% of these NGOs are actually in Nairobi, first of all. And prior to the NGO Act, 1990 Act, the administrations of these NGOs also was not very clear. How do you explain that?
I think the concentration of NGOs in Nairobi is a reflection of the concentration of all public life in business. Everything is concentrated in Nairobi. So it is also going to be the case that the NGO sector has got a higher presence in Nairobi than in any other place. But that has changed over time. You've got organizations that have got mandates around the provision of or support to provide livelihoods and so on and so forth. A lot of them are rural based, so it is not entirely true that the sector is only based in Nairobi. You're going to have a presence in
75% of it
in rural parts of the country. But as I said, if it's 75 for the sector, it is also the case that you've got 75% of anything. 75% of the legal profession is here. That is something that needs to be discussed, and that's something that can be improved on by the sector, like everything else, but it is not itself a reason for crucifying the sector. But talking about the internal governance of the sector, the first attempt to publicly regulate the sector is the NGO Coordination Act. Now that has been in place. Then we have the sector coming up on its own, driving a process that gave us the Public Benefits Organizations Act, the one that has not been enforced since it was enacted. Now, this is an attempt by the sector to proactively suggest a legislative framework for its internal governance. So the failure in getting a governance regime for the sector is not a problem for the sector. It is a problem of the government, because the act was passed by Parliament, but for reasons that we don't understand, that are patently political, the government has not brought the act into force.
All right, but yes.
Can I come back to Debarl?
Sure, yes.
So the claim that, and I first and foremost, I'm a researcher, so actually on breakfast television is probably too early for me in many ways. But one of the things that strikes me about that figure, 70%, is we need to interrogate it a little better. I suspect it comes from the NGO Coordination Bureau, because that is the only central unit that is able to keep tabs on our, on our registration processes. I suspect what you will see in that figure, 70%, is this is the percentage of organizations that are registered in Nairobi. This is not to say these are the organizations that, this is the percentage of organizations that are only working in the county of Nairobi.
No. So the survey was very categorical.
Who surveys
it? It is located, not registered in Nairobi.
So located is like a head office, right? I'll give you an example.
Is there a rhyme or any reason why you should be having maybe your headquarters in Nairobi?
Yeah.
And you know, most of your operations, maybe there is in Turkana and Kakuma.
So there are a number of things happening.
Yes,
I hear.
Areas.
And let me just start off by saying, you know, because there's no sense of defensiveness on my part. I think it is inexcusable if out of the 80 billion shillings per annum that comes into the NGO sector, that money is spent in the county of Nairobi. So I start from that position, that this money essentially should be targeting poor and vulnerable communities wherever they are in the country, whether they are in the urban settlements of Mathare or Kibera. That's one thing. But I think actually, as you're saying, I think it needs to be devolved to the 47 counties. So I start from that position. But I think I'm challenging a little bit the indicators that are being used for this, because if you take an organization like ActionAid or World Vision or CARE, and you said to them, they will probably be in your 70%. They would probably be indicated that these organizations are physically located. Can I add even the Kenya Human Rights Commission? These organizations are their headquarters are physically located in Nairobi, but they have satellite offices in many counties across the country. And I think for me, what I would be more interested in is looking at expenditure. To what extent are the resources that are coming into these organizations being spent in Nairobi? And to what extent are they being spent supporting community organizations across the 47 counties? The thing that I do know is that on February the 2nd, when we called the Second Leaders Public Benefits Organizations Summit, we had 99 organizations represented by 316 people, coming from, I think, upwards of 35 counties, and 36 counties. And those county leaders were very clear what they needed at the county level. So I think it's not true to say, based on the kind of constituency that we know, that 70% of organizations are based in Nairobi, unless what you mean is that their headquarters are physically located in Nairobi, but then you need to count also their county branches, the offices that they have across the country.
All right. Peter Kiama, you want to weigh in on that, then we move on?
No, in terms of, I think there are logistical advantages of organizations being based in Nairobi and major towns, of course, including access to resources and access to expertise.
Yes.
That is mainly domiciled within the main Nairobi and the major towns. But it's important to also interrogate the strategies that those organizations use.
Yes.
Number one, I would say, I think that study needs to be redone, because if you look at the sector has over 5,000 actors. Most of them are actually not NGOs; they are CBOs, registered not even with the with the NGO bureau, but registered at the Department of Social Services,
yes,
who provide very critical support to widows and orphans, people with HIV/AIDS on the ground, and other interventions that are critical across the country. The ones that are based in Nairobi or have offices in Nairobi have adopted strategies that ensure that they reach the most vulnerable. If I take the example of the independent medical legal unit, we are based in Nairobi, yes, but most of our work happens on the ground in each of the counties. We have a presence in 41 counties, not through staff that we have employed, but through a network of volunteers. So we have an army out there of about 300 people who provide services across the country. If you get a call from Mandera today, we'll be able to respond to the person in Mandera because we have professionals in Mandera who are volunteers in our big family. So the fact that they are based in Nairobi doesn't mean that they are Nairobi centric. I think it's basically for logistical and other purposes that will help them to access either expertise or resources that will help them to reach the most vulnerable.
Right. But prior to 1990, and the NGO Act, we never had any institutional legislative framework that will govern the NGO world as well. Could this have created maybe the spawning ground for all these corruption cases we're hearing about, because we didn't have the NGO board to actually register you, so they used to register that through Companies Act or societies or the Ministry of Culture and societies as well. So that particular period, and the administration of NGOs. So how was it then that maybe we can say this was the laying framework of where we are today, and how is the NGO board trying to streamline that?
I mean, I'm old enough maybe to even tell you that story from personal experience.
Yes.
So in 1990, we had a act which was called the Council, I think it was called the Council for Social Services, if I remember rightly. Something along those lines. And that basically saw NGOs essentially as being charitable organizations.
Yes.
So they were, most of them were organizations, you know, like for example, I remember the associations of people with disabilities, you know, those kind of organizations, people who were trying to, I guess, support needy Kenyans. By about, and it was in a context where really government had abdicated its responsibility to provide public health care and education, largely driven by the World Bank. There was a time when the World Bank forbid governments across Africa and the world generally to provide services like universal primary health care. In fact, if you talked about the very things now that we expect as Kenyans, you are considered to be either a socialist or you are considered to be either, you know, crazy, that governments would never provide universal primary health care. So at that time, NGOs were really the backbone of supporting, you know, at that time maybe 60% of the population that were under the poverty line. Things began to change towards the end of the 80s, and as a result of human rights violations and essentially autocratic governments, NGOs began to take on much more of a governance role and much more an accountability role. And it was felt then by the one-party state that that NGOs needed to be checked, they needed to be controlled. And that's really how the NGO Coordination Act came into being. This was a 1991 act. I was very young, I'd just come out of university, and I was thrown into this conversation with very many people like Willie Mutunga, Elkano Odembo, Davinda Lamba. These were really the veterans of the sector. And at that point we said no, that we do not wish to be seen as a security threat. We want to be seen as a complementary partner in terms of development. So for 3 good years, we refused to register under the NGO Coordination Act, because we felt that the act was hostile to the interests of the sector. Now that act essentially got revised. In fact, it's the first act, I think, in the history of Kenya where it was changed prior to coming into commencement because of the opposition of the sector. And then we had the NGO Coordination Act. Now that act has been around us now for, 16 years? No, 26 years, let's be clear. We, in 2009, declared as a sector, and I think certain government offices were in sympathy with us, that we needed a new legislation that would be in line with the new constitution. And that legislation is the Public Benefits Organizations Act. And it is a great piece of work, to be honest. If you look at it across the African continent, it is very clear on public accountability. It holds us to higher standards of accountability, even internally within the sector. I usually compare one to a Vitz and the other one to a Porsche. No disrespect to your viewers who have Vitzes. But this is a really powerful piece of legislation. And what is amazing really is after 4 years, we have not seen that act commenced, because that act would essentially provide 2 things. One is it would raise the bar for accountability for us. And also it's an act that we want to be governed by. You know, it is something that we are saying, please govern us by this act, not by an act that is 26 years old and essentially comes from a one-party state.
Thank you. And I think also we need to, maybe you want to weigh in on this
Yes.
a little bit. Yes.
Yes. I think the point to add is the following. Remember the history of this country. It is a history dominated by one-party rule, and where a political opposition was therefore banned and not allowed. You had loyal opposition during different stages of the country's political history. You would have loyal opposition within parliament, the bearded sisters and that sort of thing. But then now you have outside of parliament, because opposition is officially not tolerated, it is expressing itself through underground movements such as Mwa Kenya, through universities and university unions and so on and so forth. So that is where dissent and alternative political organization was being agitated through. When the NGO sector comes out in the late 80s, it is resisting one-party rule. You had the Law Society also playing a very big role in organizing alternative views around the 80s. But so when this sector comes up, it is the first attempt to bring above board what had been an underground movement, what had been driven underground because of political, whatever political resistance or political backlash against organization. So the sector has been responsible for organizing an alternative vision about governance that was only agitated through underground movements in the 80s and the 70s because the political circumstances did not allow it. Now, one of the consequences of then organizing an alternative view about how the country should be governed is that you receive the attention of the rulers, because this challenges their authority. And the NGO Coordination Act that comes into place is an attempt to crack down on the threat that the sector represents. But at the same time, it is, if you look at everything, it is actually a progression, because whereas previously people who are doing the same work would end up at Nyayo House in torture chambers, now you've got a regulatory framework, even though it is not the best that you could have. At the very least, you're saying we are all civilized. Let's talk about how we want to live in this country. So a further progression on that is the PBO Act that we have then conceived after being around for more than 20 years. After the public has gotten used to the type of engagement that the sector represents, the sector is then now saying it is time to move us to a regulatory framework that represents the maturity that has been earned by the sector in moving the country forward.
But before we take a caller who's hanging on the line, also on the 2nd of February you held a PBO Act, that is a Public Benefit Organization Act Summit, I think the second one. And observing the tone and tenor of that particular meeting or that particular summit, you could easily tell this is a very frustrated society. This is a very frustrated Lord. And we want to know what is really underpinning your frustrations. What are the underlying factors right now? With the PBO Act itself, are you frustrated with it? Are you happy with it? What is the information that is domiciled with this particular act that you're not really happy with, right? But allow me also to take Shevon, who's hanging on the line right now, to paper maybe one or two questions to our panelists who are here this morning. Good morning, Shevon.
Morning, Debarl.
Morning to you. Yeah, you have a question or contribution?
I would like to ask the panelists, why are they worried when the government is scrutinizing the NGOs they are heading?
Yes.
And then we don't see the work the NGOs are doing, especially in the local areas. We just hear of NGOs in Nairobi, in northern frontier districts. Can they tell us the exact work they are doing? Because I don't see why they should be worrying about their being deregistered by the government.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right, thank you. I think he's done with his question. Maybe you want to respond to that before we go to the summit, just to clear the air?
Can I respond?
Sure.
And this goes down to the question, it combines with the question you asked, what is our greatest frustration at the moment? And we are a very frustrated sector. It is true. The frustration comes from a lack of engagement in good faith. If authorities say in good faith that we've fallen short of the glory, and that the consequence of that is a deregistration, and it is a statement made in good faith, then we can engage with that. But what we have had is a reincarnation of an early experience in the 90s, where you had a demonization of the sector for political reasons. So people are being told, you're running, you're thieves, you're not accountable, and so on and so forth. Now, we don't accept that accusation because it's not made in good faith. And those who make that accusation, when we ask for an engagement so that they show us the proof of the accusation against us, they are not ready for that kind of engagement. And the viewer, and the answer to the viewer is the same, that we are not worried that we are not worried about facing any consequences, or we are not worried about being accountable. And if accountability also requires sometimes that an organization be registered, so be it. What we are concerned about is that we have got a smear campaign going on, and we've got an engagement that lacks good faith, that then only serves to soil individual and organizational reputations.
But why will there be any particular intent to smear your sector? Why do you think there's this smear campaign?
If you want to kill a dog, you first give it a bad name.
Okay, so who is giving you a bad name? Who is giving you a bad name?
I think we've got a difficult relationship with the political leadership in the country. We've not always had the same points of views about accountability. One of the abiding points of departure is the stand that we have taken as a sector and as individuals about, for example, accountability for the violence that happened in 2007, 2008. We have said time and again that accountability was necessary in relation to that. That is not a position that was necessary, that is tolerated at all political levels. And one of the consequences of that is this backlash against the sector. Another issue is about accountability around elections. We've taken particular standpoints about that. They're not always popular and they're not always acceptable across the board. And so those are some of the sources of the problem. The third issue that brings significant differences between the sector and the government is about accountability, is about securing the country from the terrorist threat. We are all committed to public security, but we are also committed to the observance of human rights. We've made that particularly clear at all stages. So when we insist, as we do, that we must at all times uphold human rights, and even when we are trying to secure the country, that message again is sometimes misunderstood. We are accused of supporting terrorism. We are accused as lacking sympathy for victims of terrorism. That is not the case. It is just a misunderstanding. And our position is that there must always be a balance between securing the country, creating an environment where everybody is going to be safe, but this must also be done within the confines of law and within the confines of observance for human rights. So those are examples of issues that create strife between the sector and the government. So
could it be, before we also take Kathy, who's hanging on the line, and I'll paper this question to you, Peter Kiama. He mentions, of course, the current, the political system that we have in this country, and the breakaway point could have been also the ICC case, because we had the NGOs also going to, The Hague, and they took a stand, of course, against the current regime as well. Do you think in any way that also could have spurred what we're seeing right now with the Public Benefits Authority, with the donor funding that now has been clamped down to around 15%? I don't know if that has been lifted as well. Just briefly before we take, or can we take Kathy, then maybe she has the same question, and then you can also ask or answer that. Kathy, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, morning to you. Have a question or contribution for our panelists, please?
A contribution. I work in the NGO sector in Amagoro.
Yes.
And I'm really proud of them.
Yes.
However, can they balance themselves out so that they're not always coming out negative? So that our sector is not viewed as combative, because we do a lot of good work and a few are just giving us a bad name. So what can they do, especially those luminaries over there, to balance themselves out so that whenever there's something positive that they can engage the public in, then we can be seen as a positive force, because we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, calling from Teso. Right, maybe
Can I deal with that?
let's give it to Peter, then you can answer that.
Okay.
To my question, then I think, Kiama, you're going to answer Kathy's or wrong as well.
Let me say that, the discomfort that government has with civil society or those actors in the civic space, that discomfort is not unusual. You expect it because we do engage with government at different levels, whether there's CBOs on the ground like Kathy's NGO in Teso, or whether an NGO in Busia, as the gentleman Chevron spoke about. We engage in a very open manner, because we believe in the rule of law. We believe in the Constitution.
Yes.
So we are actually there as partners to implement and to ensure that the country lives to, to the principles and values of the Constitution. That's the bottom line for us. And therefore, anybody who is departing from those principles of the Constitution, then would feel uncomfortable. And I think we keep on hyping this, fallout between government and civil society on the ICC. There have been many thousands of other fallouts, especially at county level. We have very, very vibrant civil society actors on the ground in counties,
yes,
especially in the last 5 years, under devolution, under the new Constitution. We have actors who are training and sensitizing communities to claim their rights under devolution.
Yes.
Not only training citizens, but also training county government officials on how to run county governments better. So if you look at our budgets across the board in civil society, I would believe that maybe 50% goes to service delivery, not accountability. Actually, the money that goes to accountability is minimal. It's mainly working together as partners with government, training police, training prison officers, training health personnel. We go to Kegoro Training College. KHRC has been going there for many years to train police officers who are in Keganjo. We go to Embakasi to train the GSU and the APs. So we are all over the country providing service and being a true partner and a good partner to government. But the difficulty is when you come to accountability. When those partners at county level working on governance and accountability begin to ask questions about where is the money for health going, then somebody gets uncomfortable. When they ask what happened to the land that belonged to the municipal council in our area, what happened when it came to devolution, where are those pieces of public land, the school land that has been grabbed, that is where the fallout begins, around accountability. Not only at international level, but mainly actually at county level, at the grassroots. When people say our children need their playground, we need the public toilet, that's where the fallout begins. And therefore, I don't think we are trying to be antagonists here. I think we're just saying the Constitution says that our children should have their school compound and their playground safeguarded.
This goes back to what I was asking you, George, right? The tone and tenor that we had from your summit, or Irongo, you were there. Yeah, someone will pick a very combative, frustrated sector, right? And this is what actually Kathy is trying to persuade you as the luminaries, as she's calling you guys, to try and work on this, because it seems now there's an antagonism that is ongoing between you and the government as well.
I mean, I think it would be wrong to. Maybe let me just clear up something that was tweeted by the Nation TV. I think it's which was that I said that it is disgraceful that 80 billion shillings of the sector is spent in Nairobi. I did not say that. I said it would be disgraceful if 80 billion shillings was spent in Nairobi. Just to correct that for your social media followers. But I think coming back to your point, I think for me, I would be very sad if all that is left in the sector is a frustrated sector. Because as I said, the sector started as a hopeful sector. It is a sector that provides hope to Kenyans that believed in the Constitution enough to vote for it in 2010. So there's a level of frustration that the relationship is not working. Yeah? Both the government know it, we know it, the country knows it now. But I think for us to remain frustrated is actually perhaps not to transform the situation. And I think the transformation will come with us continuing to say very clearly what we're about as a sector, what do we stand for in terms of Kenya, and what would we like to complement government to be able to do better. And we will find people. I know even within government there is a split between how the sector has been handled over the last 3-4 years. Just to give you an example, the PBO Act of 2013 was actually commenced by the Devolution Cabinet Secretary on September the 9th. He announced to the country that after consultations with the sector, and those consultations took about 9 to 10 months of discussion. There was consultation? There was consultation. Okay. And I know because some of us were in that conversation with the Cabinet Secretary. And we gave him an assurance that commencing the Act would not lead to further deterioration of relationships. In fact, what we said to him was that by commencing the Act, you remove the perception in the sector that this government wants to destroy the sector. that you have now an open door policy that we can engage with. There are some things we will not agree on. That is fine. But we will all agree on that we are acting within the Constitution that we have all abided by, yes. Both government and by civil society. So we had that agreement. The act was commenced, and then within a week or two, that was unraveled, and we went back to a situation where it seems like now the investment of energy has gone into an act that is 26 years old. Mm-hmm. It was an act that came out of a one-party state, and it was an act that was actually not embraced by the sector at the time. We essentially came to an uneasy agreement with the government at that time, in the heat of 1990, mm-hmm. that we would live by the act. But I think what has changed really is we have an opportunity to be much bolder, to be much more creative. So I know within government there are some people who believe in that. But unfortunately, we have yet to see that from the Ministry of Interior. But I think just to show that we are not frustrated, one of the resolutions of that summit was actually to have a dialogue with the Cabinet Secretary personally and the Principal Secretary on what is it that we can do to reduce the levels of acrimony, to reduce the levels of mistrust, and really find a way in which we are able to, yes, protect and promote the rights and freedoms in the Constitution, but at the same time, to make government work more effectively.
Right, which was also raising, your eyebrows as well, of why the ministry was being moved from the devolution, where actually the PBO Act was, the PBO Act was generated and you were consulted, and now it's been taken to the Interior Ministry as well. For you, you read there is maybe a dark underbelly to this. Why was it, previously in the devolution ministry, and now it's domiciled in the Interior Ministry as well? George, you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I think, you see, there are many answers we would like from government, and because the relationship is not working, we can't get those answers. The question you've asked is one that we ask, but we don't have an answer, and we would like an engagement. If there was an engagement, maybe there is an answer, but at the moment, there's no engagement. We have nobody to talk to.
But we can look at the genesis of all this, why it was shifted to the Interior Ministry. First of all, it is all because of Fazul, who is the CEO of NGO board, right?
We regard that as another hostile act against the sector.
Yeah, could you, for the benefit of our viewers who they don't really understand how or why you arrived here, tell us the genesis of it and why.
I think the last time the sector was in the Ministry of Interior was in the early 1990s, and then thereafter for a long time the sector was viewed as a developmental sector, so it has been moved around developmental ministries in the government. This is the first time since that period that we are being viewed as like a security threat, and therefore being moved into the Ministry of Interior. So we've gone back more than 20 years in terms of being regarded, how the government regards us and how it locates our administration and management. Now, as I said, we don't have an engagement because the relationship is not working. If we had an engagement, we would ask how the government views us, and we would ask why they do this to the sector. And if they ask us questions, we think we have answers for those questions. But at the moment, when we seek an engagement with them, and you try to seek an engagement for this show yourself, and you've reported that it was difficult for them to give that engagement. That is our daily experience. But let me go back to the issue that Kathy Malala raised when she called, which is, why don't we balance ourselves out? Why don't we give credit to the government? And this is also a question that I receive when I meet government people. They are always asking, why do we always criticize them? And that is definitely not the case. We are not always criticizing them. There are spots of very, very constructive engagement that we've had with government. One of those for the Kenya Human Rights Commission has been around the Makonde community. This is a community that arrived in this country more than 80 years ago. They've been discriminated against, and generations of themselves could not get IDs because they were regarded as foreigners. People who came as adults died here, their children have been born, and if you're born 80 years ago, you are already an old person, but you don't have an ID, and you can't give an ID to your children, and you can't get services, and so on and so forth. So we've organized the Makonde which is a community that lives in Kwale, which again negates the view you had that we only work in Nairobi. We've organized the Makonde to demand recognition as nationals of the country. And in October last year, they met with the president at State House. And 2 weeks ago, the president finally gave them ID cards. We've written a formal congratulation to the president, where the president has shown leadership. All other previous presidents refused or failed to deal with the issue of the Makonde. They regarded as a political hot potato. It wasn't any of that. It's just a failure to lead. We've said the president has led us to give them credit.
We will question also why the Makonde? We have the Nubians, they've been living here for over a century, and there's still a ticklish issue. They've not been identified as Kenyans as well.
Good question, and that is actually when we were in Kwale and the president was giving the Makonde ID cards. That question, we have raised the question. There are many pockets of stateless people. There are the Nubians and there are Shirazi who live at the coast, and there are pockets of other stateless people. What the answer we've had from the ministry that we've engaged with is that there had to be a start, and the framework for what to do with stateless people was uncertain. So certainty and leadership has now been provided. So there will be a methodical move to work with other stateless communities that are in this country and give them a national recognition. That is an example of a positive and supportive relationship that we've had with the government, and we've said so.
Thank you, thank you. I think we should be winding up, and very briefly, because we need to talk about also the donor funding and the 15% capping that is being slapped on you, which is frustrating for you as well. What really informed this? Do you think still it is the mismanagement? Because we have also, let's take for instance the global funding on HIV and AIDS. And we've had that particular funding being rolled back because of mismanagement with this particular fund. So we don't know if it's coming from the government or it's from the civil society as well. So if we have the donor funding capped at 15%, why shouldn't it be like that? Because, first of all, we have donor fatigue in the world.
Right.
Isn't that the case?
I mean, I think there's first things, let's just correct the impression that the 15% cap that was introduced in 2013 November was passed. It wasn't. It was an attempt by the executive on 3 separate occasions over the last 2 years to essentially cap all foreign funding to NGOs to 85%. So the understanding was that, sorry, to cap back to 15%. So 85%, about 65 billion shillings, would be lost to Kenya as a result of this law. We've seen it in other places, in Ethiopia, where the sector has actually been just destroyed to some extent by a executive action to this nature. It was ill-advised and actually anti-developmental. It would have affected the primary healthcare, education, agricultural work, and governance and accountability work in many of the counties in which we have high levels of poverty. So it has been blocked. It hasn't happened. So that, I think, is the first point. The second point really is your comment is that a good idea? We would probably say no, it is a terrible idea. In a context where we have at least 47% of the population under the poverty line, in a context where you have statelessness, in a context where you have rampant corruption running into the billions, sometimes we even hear hundreds of billions of shillings, it would be a disaster to this country to cut funding that is already quite tight for the sector to be able to play its role in terms of governance, in terms of community empowerment, and in terms of development services. So I think that's the rationale for why this is a bad idea. The idea did not come from a request from the development partners. In fact, the development partners that fund both government and NGOs essentially disagreed with the policy proposal that was brought before Parliament. They disagreed with it. And even up to now, if you were to interview any of the development partners, even the multilateral ones, they would disagree.
Thank you.
So it's not come from that sector. It's not come from a corruption concern. It's really come from, I think, an attempt to grab resources from the sector. Because the proposal was not simply to cap it. It was for that 85% to come to government, and then government would give that to the sector. And I think that would have been very dangerous.
Right. Because we're really stuck for time, and this is, I will be remiss if I don't really ask you, why would we have all this hullabaloo that is coming from the NGO Board Council? And first of all, you have the NGO Code of Conduct, or Council Code of Conduct, that was in 1995. I don't know how it has been revised to current act as well. If you're living within the Council Code of Conduct, why then will they be frustrated by you? As we're winding up briefly.
Yeah, I think for me, as I wind up, without going to the specifics, I would like to state that the sector is not happy in the way it's being handled. I think the sector is being handled, is being mistreated, and I think that needs to stop. I think we need to embrace partnership. We have, stretched our hand for partnership.
Yes.
We would like to see the government also stretching their hand for true partnership. I think that's basically what we would require to see. However, we know that that is not easy, because there are situations where we won't agree with various government viewpoints or decisions. There are times they won't agree with some of the methods that we use. But I think let's proceed from now on. First of all, by gazetting the PBO Act, because it is a basis for greater partnership as guided by the new Constitution of Kenya 2010.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from you, George, your winding thoughts as well. And I'm given to understand also we have some officials of some NGOs who have resigned because of the current frustration from the government. And when they said also they don't need civic education at all, especially the ones that is being rolled out by the civil society.
I think all I would say in closing is that what has lacked is an engagement. Let's have an engagement with the government. Let them tell us what they regard as our shortcomings. We can answer those questions, and then we'll see where that takes us. What is lacking is there isn't a discussion between us and the government. There's nobody to talk to in the government. I can't easily meet officials to talk about these things. Let's not talk about them in the media. Let's also talk about them in government offices. That is missing.
Thank you.